Hello and welcome back to another episode of Advanced RC Adventures. A2RC here. This is a channel where we investigate, explore, build and explain, upgrade, and advance Nitro RCs to another level. Come start a new adventure with me. Today we have a pretty special, or at least special to me, side adventure, another engine overview. This is the Golden Lion Dynamite Mach15. This is a completely brand new engine build that I completed on January 1st, the brand new year, first day of the new year, New Year's Day, 2023. And let's get this out of the bag and take a look at what might be considered my very first Shelf Queen engine build. Now the reason this is a pretty special build to me is you might recall, or if you do not, the Mach15 came on the ready-to-run graphite version of the Losi XXX NT. Looked nothing like this version though. All chromed out head, brand new block, brand new everything. Found all in parts. This build started as I had an old Mach15, the blue head version that I wanted to rebuild, and the parts became harder and harder to find, and I said to myself, as I collect parts, I want to build a brand new version of this engine and make it something special. This has a ginormous Crazy Nut racing head on top of it. And let's break into this and explore and have the adventure of this Mach15. We have a nice big and bold Mach into the mold there. 15 on the other side. This is a small block engine, side exhaust. Let's take off this carb. Let's go through this engine one by one. And have a great time doing it. So let's grab the 6mm. Let's take off this pinch bolt. Take out the carb. And start the adventure. Notice a nice big M on here for Mach. These engines were built by Golden Lion, which is the SH company. They're Dynamite branded engines. This is the Mach15 version. This is one of the two crown jewels, in my opinion, of finding brand new. This is a complete brand new carb that I found. I was trying to piece together seals, and late night search was able to find a brand spanking new, completely built carb, and it was an amazing find. I completely tore apart the carburetor, cleaned everything, inspected, re-lubed, put some moly-coat on the O-ring seals, and then saved it for the build. It uses a standard butyl O-ring here on the neck. There doesn't appear to be any taper on the neck inside, or it's very little. Now I do not remember what the barrel size is, so why don't we give that a little measure. So this is a 6mm barrel carb, which is ginormous. in my opinion, for a 15. 18s normally have a 6 to 6.5 millimeter. Sometimes, in a rare occasion, 7 millimeter, but 6 to 6.5 is an 18 size carb. And this is a 6 millimeter for 15. Normal 15s are somewhere in the world of 5.5 to 6, so this is a nice big carb. All brass construction for the inlet, barb, and high-speed needle. This is a 2-needle carb. We have the high-speed needle here, low-speed needle here, idle screw adjustment, and this is a rotary carb. So fantastic find, brand new, complete carb for this build. The other next kind of special thing is probably most people that are in the vintage engine world know what Tiger Drive is. Tiger Drive is, in a sense, a rotostart, but notice it's pretty different. We have the hex driver here, which goes to a set of gears inside, which then moves the starter shaft and one-way bearing to turn over the engine. We're going to take this apart. We're going to talk about it a little bit. You're going to take a look at the internals, starter shaft, as we continue to go through. The Tiger Drive system has some pros and cons. It's very durable, which is a big positive, and it works well, but only if it is shimmed and set up properly. The biggest trouble about these Tiger Drives, the big con, is that it takes a lot of patience and effort to get the gearing and the shimming done properly so that the gears inside last for a long time. And if you haven't messed around with engines very much, or even this style of bevel gear kind of setup, you can get yourself into trouble. Take your time, have some patience with it. You can still get these today, and they even made an all metal outer case for them as well, but the internal gears are the same. But this is the one that I found, and I wanted to get this color with the nice shine silver, and I think it looks great for this particular build. And it kind of sets it apart. Instead of just having a pull start or a roto start, or finding a backplate to get it a bump start, this helps to keep this build a pretty vintage in time period, and it makes it, in my opinion, look pretty spectacular. Notice on here it does not use the fourth. These Tiger Drives in a way were relatively universal. The company tried to make them universal. They did have specific types of gears and starter shafts depending on the size, but they were made to be relatively universal in some of the components. So let's pop this off and go through the Tiger Drive system and let you see what this pretty special Mach15 has to offer. So before we pop that off completely, let's look at the hardware. These are stainless steel M2.5 bolts. They have a stainless washer on them to help go against that plastic Tiger Drive outer case, and these are 10 millimeter long. Let's pop off this outer cover. These gears use a light grease. I like to use the Otter's grease for stuff like this. So we have a bevel gear here, a pinion bevel gear up top that goes from the starter shaft or the starter wand, spins that first gear and goes on to the second. Let's wiggle the starter shaft out. These engines use an internal one-way bearing. So we have a number of different shims here to create the proper spacing on the gears. I believe this is a 6 millimeter. Yeah, it's a 6 millimeter starter shaft style. they made different starter shafts for different types of engines or one-way bearings. Set that aside. And then here it just looks relatively traditional. Backplate goes in through that starter shaft bore. We'll pop off this backplate, take a look at the one-way bearing and the internals before we pop off this head. So now we have the back plate off. For folks that are interested, these are M2.5 bolts as well for the back plate, which is pretty common. And they are 10 millimeters long. Black oxide. Take a look at the back plate and one-way bearing. This uses a nice butyl O-ring here on the back. The one-way bearing fits inside of there. Two different slots for the crankshaft pin, starter pin, and that bevel gear goes in through the back onto the one-way bearing. The spin, the one-way, and eventually start the engine. So let's set that back plate to the side there. And let's take a look at the internals here. So I searched and searched for one of these crazy nut racing heads. I'm not joking, for over 9 months, close to a year. These builds, especially vintage builds like this, they don't happen overnight. It's a kind of a labor of love to search and find all over the world the parts that you need to create a brand new build like this, and especially one of these vintage crazy nut racing heads. Take a look at how big this is. Here's the size of the carb. It's about 42 millimeter, which is approximately like 1 inch and 3/4 tall. Let's pop it off and take a little bit better look at it. So this uses a button or an underhead, which was very nice for the design for these Mach15s. Similar to the SH18 that we reviewed, it's a bit of a downfall for these head bolts. These are M2.5 head bolts. They are sufficient, but I definitely would prefer to have some M3 style head bolts. And these are 14 millimeters long. So the length is pretty standard, but using an M2.5 leaves a little bit on the table. I would love to see an M3 to have a little bit more strength on these heads. So let's take a look at this head. This is a multi-directional, all CNC machined head from Crazy Nut Racing. The head button goes down inside of there for this 4-bolt head design. Pretty darn large. Without scratching it, let's take a look at the basic OD. It's about 50 millimeter, or just about 2 inches in diameter on this block. Take a look here. It's essentially the same size, the same height as the block itself. Engraved Crazy Nut Racing. So I was saying this is a multi-directional head. That means that air can flow in all 90-degree directions. So you can place this head in, especially since it's a head button, you can rotate this around to whatever way you want. And generally, it's you take a look at the writing, and depending on what car or truck you're going to put it on, you can put it on any way that you want. Very, very lightweight, being CNC billet machined. And just a fantastic kind of art piece to this build. And I'm so happy to have found, because this shelf queen of an engine definitely deserves something like this, and it is quite a beautiful thing. So let's pop off the head button. We have 2 copper shims. They're more than likely going to be the same thickness. Let's give a little measure here. So that's a 0.1 on the first shim, and another 0.1. So we have a total of 0.2, which is a good starting point for this Mach15 and running it on 20 or 25% nitro. This is a standard head button. No, it's a non-turbo plug head button. Right now, this has a brand new OS 8 medium plug, which is just a placeholder, but it would be perfect for running this engine. You can place an A3 or even a number 7, which is a medium hot, in here as well, depending on what you want it to do with your timing advancing as well as the nitro concentration, but this uses a standard plug. And let's pop out this sleeve and take a look. So this ABN engine, aluminum piston, brass sleeve, nickel coated. Big, beautiful piston. This is a billet machined rod, brass bushing. Ground on the back for the back plate. Big cutout on the skirt of the piston here. This is a captured wrist pin. There are clips on either side of that wrist pin inside of the piston itself to keep that in there. Has a single light oil groove on the top. Groove on that center portion of the shaft. But the oil grooves are actually on the very bottom and the very top of these rods. And these appear to be a cast piston and then later machined. So let's take a look at this sleeve a little bit. So these engines, by design of the porting using ABN construction, this landed somewhere in between that OS CV and 12 or 15 CVR platform. These were expected to be somewhere in the world of 0.7 and 0.9 horsepower. You can, maybe the camera will show it up, but you can see some of the brass on here and then the nickel coating on the inside and out. So let's take a look at these ports. Let's start with the boost port. This is a nice big boost port, especially for an ABN style ready to run style engine. Big sweeping bevel, nickel coated all over. The exhaust port is pretty basic. We just have a nice big rectangle here, no dog ears, no real internal bevel, just a nice big rectangular port. And then the transfer ports, the same standard kind of size transfer ports, no real beveling, No fangs here on the side. The same for the other one. So a pretty straightforward sleeve for this Mach15. It does have an okay bottom bevel on the sleeve itself though, which is nice. These do use an indicator pin on the block. Let's push out the crank, take a look at the crank. So this is, I would say, one of the bigger downfalls on the engine itself. There's a lot to be desired for this induction window. It's relatively small. It's not drilled and filled, which wouldn't be expected for a ready-to-run engine. And let's give that crank bore a measure. 6.3. So that's a little bit smaller than some of the other engines that we've seen. And the induction window itself is relatively small. That's a 5.5 by 8 millimeter window. But these still ran pretty darn well. The bearings, 9 millimeter IB. And then let's take a look at the block itself. These use a chrome steel bearing front and rear. Front shield is on there. Just a beautiful silver kind of matte aluminum block. Beautiful. Put it all together and you have something pretty special and definitely vintage. Using the Tiger Drive, all brand new parts, built from scratch. And what's not to love but another vintage engine that came to life from individual parts. If you really enjoy these engine overviews, then feel free to check out the other ones on A2RC. I appreciate you taking the adventure with me. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. If you like anything 10 scale, nitro, and especially touring cars, then this is the place to be, and thanks for taking the adventure with me.